Our scripture reading this morning comes from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. It says, I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. To take a deeper dive into that passage, we're going to examine its application in the lives of two very similar, tough, gritty, hard-nosed men that just happened to live 3,000 years apart. And my congregation has a number of race fans, so with the Daytona 500 coming up soon, the first person that we're going to examine is the Intimidator, Dale Earnhardt. Dale grew up in Kannapolis, North Carolina, which is a small textile mill town about 30 miles northeast of Charlotte. Now, it's widely accepted and to a certain degree celebrated in NASCAR that the drivers don't particularly like one another, and they aren't always politically correct when speaking about each other. Well, Dale got the nickname the Intimidator because of the way that he struck fear in other people. When it came to verbal intimidation, Dale liked to poke and prod a little bit at the other drivers, especially his rival Jeff Gordon. See, Jeff grew up in Vallejo, California, which is both geographically and culturally about as far away from Kannapolis, North Carolina as you can get. And these contrasting images and personas of the two drivers could not have been any greater. They each came to represent everything that the other driver was not. Jeff was Hollywood. Dale was rural America. Jeff's number 24 car was painted with bright, flashy colors. Dale's number 3 car was painted black. Jeff was younger, shorter, had a higher pitched voice and perfectly coiffed hair. Dale sported Wrangler jeans, cowboy boots, a thick mustache, and aviator shades. So keeping up with this off-the-track banter, Dale would portray Jeff as being a soft little boy, far from being a real man. So for instance, Jeff Gordon won the inaugural Brickyard 400 here in Indianapolis in 1994. Well, Dale Earnhardt won the following year in 1995, but in the post-race interview, when the reporters were talking to him, he claimed to be the first man to ever win the race. Well, the reporter reminded him that Jeff Gordon had won the year before, and Dale gave a sheepish grin and said, "Oh, who, Wonder Boy?" Well, Jeff Gordon ended up winning the Winston Cup Series championship that year, but in advance of the awards ceremony, Dale made a joke that Jeff would have to toast with a glass of milk instead of champagne, which implied two things. Number one, that Jeff was not legally of age to drink alcohol, and number two, that Jeff was kind of a feeble milquetoast type of person. Well, off the track, privately, these two rivals greatly respected one another's talent, so the public banter was really just a matter of trying to get under each other's skin a little bit. Well, growing up poor, Dale had to hustle and scrap for everything that he had. In his early days, he raced at the local dirt tracks. And at that level of racing, the difference in prize money between second and third place might only be $15, but Dale desperately needed that money, so he would do whatever it took to gain that position. And he kept that same mentality even after reaching stock car racing's Premier League, the NASCAR Cup Series. And this was never more evident than in the 1999 Cup race at Bristol International Speedway in Bristol, Tennessee. Bristol is a short track. It's only a half mile long. So by comparison, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is 2.5 miles long. So in other words, you're taking approximately the same number of cars that could otherwise spread out over 2.5 miles, and you're shrinking them into a track that's 80% smaller. And the cars are packed in there like sardines, which means that if you want to get ahead, you might have to push and shove and knock some other cars out of the way. You know, we've all seen the crazy footage of department stores on Black Friday when they open the doors and there's just hordes of people that are pushing and shoving and knocking each other over to try to get to the electronics department first. That's kind of what NASCAR short track racing is like, except the prize for getting first is much greater than 50% off a flat screen TV. Well, in the August 1999 Cup race at Bristol, Dale started near the back of the race. He started in 26th place. But heading into the final lap, he had worked his way through traffic and was trailing only the leader, Terry Labonte. Now, many drivers from that era would tell you that There was no more sinking feeling than being in the home stretch of a race, and you look in your rearview mirror and you see that black number 3 GM Goodwrench Chevy coming up fast, because that only meant one thing, and the Intimidator was on the prowl. Well, in order to win the race, there was only one maneuver that Dale could use. He had to hit Terry Labonte from behind and cause him to spin out of the way. And he had to do it at just the right moment, just the right angle to get the maneuver done to win. And sure enough, that's exactly what Dale did. Coming around turn 2, bonk! Terry's car makes a complete 180. Dale swoops around, takes a checkered flag, and wins the race. Now, I've shared before that if you can learn to see God in everything, you can find Him in anything. So as part of my sermon development for this one, I'm watching the replay of this epic race finish over and over, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, where have I seen this before? And then it hits me. 1 Samuel chapter 17. In this chapter, we meet a tough, gritty, hard-nosed guy named David. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. A number of his older brothers served in the army, but David wasn't old enough yet to enlist, so he spent his time bouncing back and forth between taking care of his family's sheep at home and then bringing supplies from home to the army camp to meet some of the needs there. Now, at this point, the Israelites are in a standoff with the Philistines. The Israelites occupy one hill, the Philistines occupy the other, and there's a valley in between them. And the Philistines have a gigantic warrior named Goliath. Well, twice a day for 40 days in a row, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel. He said, "Choose a man to come down here and fight me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Well, hearing these words, the Israelites were terrified. Well, because he had made a number of trips to the army camp, David had become aware of Goliath's mano-a-mano, winner-take-all challenge. And looking at the situation, he starts channeling his inner Dale Earnhardt. Here he is, this blue-collar guy from Bethlehem. An opportunity has come knocking in the form of the most high-risk, high-reward, gut-check moment of his life. So David decides to throw caution to the wind and push all the chips into the center. So he approaches the king of Israel and says, "Let no one lose heart of the Philistine. I will go and fight him." Well, the king replies, "You're not able to go out and fight Goliath. You're just a young man. But Goliath has been a warrior for a long time." Well, David looks at the king and, in so many words, says, "Listen, I've been a shepherd my whole life. Whenever a lion or predator comes to attack my sheep, I kill it. I stand my ground, I take out my slingshot, and I kill it. God has rescued me from the paws of I don't know how many lions and predators. He'll do the same for me against Goliath. It won't be any different." Now think back for a moment to Dale Earnhardt's 1999 victory at Bristol. He had to overtake 24 other drivers before he was finally in a mano-a-mano showdown with Terry Labonte for the win. And something similar is happening here in this Bible story. Because in David's mind, fighting all those lions and other predators was basically the same as fighting through those other 24 race cars. It all set up for that final showdown against the leader. Well, eventually, permission is given for David to come and fight Goliath. So he takes 5 stones, puts them in a pouch, gets a slingshot, is ready to go. Well, as David approaches, Goliath must have felt like he was on candid camera, because he looks down at David and he says, "Seriously? This is happening? For real? This isn't a joke? Okay, squirt. Get ready. I'm going to rip your head off. I'm going to feed you to the birds." Well, as this banter is unfolding, when it comes time for David to dish out some verbal intimidation to Goliath, we'll see that he has the same confidence as Dale Earnhardt, but none of the nuance. David marches straight towards Goliath, and he stares up at him, and in so many words says, "You want a piece of me, Hoss? Let's go, right here, right now. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. I'm going to strike you down, I'm going to cut your head off, and I am going to feed you to the birds." Woo. Well, David and Dale's verbal intimidation strategies may have differed, but the similarity of their eye-hand coordination skills was uncanny. Because in both cases, pulling off a win not only required lots of courage, but also lots of precision. Because remember from earlier, Dale Earnhardt knew he had one shot. He had to hit Terry Labonte's car at just the right place and just the right time in order to spin Terry's car out of the way and allow himself enough distance to scoot around, make the pass, get the win. Well, likewise, David knew he had one shot. He had to hit Goliath in just the right spot in order to take him out. And that's exactly what happened. David took out a stone, put it in the sling, wound up, bonk. The stone hit Goliath right in the forehead, killed him. Well, there was one part of David's pre-fight monologue that I left out on purpose because I wanted to save it for the end. As this verbal onslaught against Goliath was coming to a close, David says something incredibly important. He explains that victory will not be achieved because of his own tools. Victory will be achieved because he's putting the battle in God's hands. He's trusting that God will carry him through this difficult challenge. Well, the story of David and Goliath has been passed down through the ages, and it's come to be used as a metaphor for any kind of mismatch. Any time there's an underdog that's facing tremendous odds, that side is considered to be the David of the story. Bristol Motor Speedway, 1999. Dale Earnhardt starts the race in 26th place. He probably wasn't favored to win the race, but should sports pundits have considered him to be the underdog? No. Why? Because Dale Earnhardt, the intimidator, had the confidence to go out there and get the win. Well, why? Well, beyond his own personal character traits, another big reason why Dale could be so confident heading into any race was because he had a fantastic sponsor in GM Goodwrench. See, it didn't matter that Dale came from humble circumstances because he found a relationship with a powerful entity that provided him everything he needed to be successful. Dale Earnhardt was never the underdog, and neither was David. Folks, I submit to you that in the fight against Goliath, David's only the underdog if you don't truly understand the story. David found a relationship with a powerful entity that provided him everything he needs to succeed. And he makes it abundantly clear at the end of his pre-fight speech. He says, "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's." It doesn't matter that he came from humble circumstances, because again, he found that powerful entity. He formed that relationship, and he had everything that he needed. Does that sound like anybody we know? You know, if you believed that God would carry you through every challenge of your life, would you not have that same confidence? You know, there's this famous saying that goes, don't tell God how big your problem is. Tell your problem how big God is. Well, Goliath was a big problem in every sense of the word. But was he bigger than God? No. You know, since the beginning of time, people have faced adversity. You know, we're all confronted with big challenges. They just have different names. For David, it was Goliath. For Dale Earnhardt in the 1999 Cup race at Bristol, it was Terry Labonte. For you, it could be anything. Health concerns, financial concerns, relationship concerns, you name it. But whatever your adversity is, that you're facing in your life right now, I urge you to put the situation in God's hands. Because when God joins the race, you get grace. And remember, it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. No matter what your circumstances are, if you form a relationship with God, He will provide. And if that's the mentality that you adopt, I pity whatever's standing in your way. Your challenge may seem as big as a giant. Your situation may seem as desperate as being less than half a mile away from losing. But you know what? The second you turn the battle over to God, you are no longer the underdog. You are the intimidator. You're fighting the good fight. You're finishing the race. You're keeping the faith. You're driving the black number 3 GM Goodwrench Chevy, and you're heading to victory lane. Amen.